Hey there, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the Political Deep Dive this evening. I'm actually going to go ahead and bring my guests in. My first guest is Emily Hurtley. She is from Illinois. She was the campaign manager for Ruff Phillips in 2020, and one of my better friends.
Hi.
How's it going?
Just fine. How are you?
Excellent. So anybody who's familiar with the Political Deep Dive After Dark knows that Emily is a regular contributor, and we had a great conversation last week regarding consent culture during the After Dark show. So wanted to bring her on. Also coming to us, no stranger to the Liberty Movement, Dan Fishman, former executive director of the Libertarian Party and current executive director of People for Liberty. How you doing, Dan?
I am doing well. I'm psyched for this conversation. I think that, it's one of those things that, like, I was slightly worried that when you said we're going to have a consent culture conversation a week later that, we might have missed the news cycle. But no, silly me. Crap like this doesn't go away.
No, it never goes away. And as I pointed out during the, putting out the broadcast, is that it is a key tenet of libertarianism. Consent is a key tenet of libertarianism. You can't have libertarianism without consent being a fundamental pillar of our philosophy. I do have some really awesome comments. So one, Hody, I absolutely agree.
Thanks, Hody. You're awesome.
Before we get too deep into our conversation on consent culture, of course, news today that the capital of Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban. The Taliban were filmed inside the presidential palace. The Afghan army folded like a metal chair under my corpulent ass. I mean, we weren't even evacuated yet. We're still pulling people out of Afghanistan right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I believe the Marines are still holding the airport.
Yeah, we hold the airport, getting the last few people out of there as quickly as possible. We were supposed to be out, our date was September 11th, which, that's not going to happen. We're going to have to be gone long before that. But I was watching, there was a CNN interview with the Secretary of Defense, and he threw the Afghanistan army under the bus, basically said, we didn't know that the Afghan army would have folded this quickly. Who trained them? Who equipped them? I mean, now that equipment is Taliban surplus, and we'll probably be fighting that in some kind of incursion later on in our time. It's
exactly the same as when we ended up fighting against Iran and they were flying our own F-4s against us.
Yeah, absolutely. We lost, over 8,000 Americans in both Afghanistan and Iraq, these two wasted wars. And people are mad that we're doing it now. But this would have happened if we had gotten out of Afghanistan, late in 2001 after we overthrew the this would have happened 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the line, no matter when we would have gotten out of Afghanistan. This would have happened. That we spent, 8,000 lives and, almost $7 trillion in our treasure and, our money, and, with nothing to show for it other than broken bodies, broken minds, just numbers of people who, would have been killed in previous wars, but because of, we have so much damn experience in fighting wars now that we are.
We excel at battlefield medicine and trauma intervention.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. It's worth noting that we spent more in Afghanistan than we have spent about in the fight against COVID. People are complaining about, we've accumulated this $6 trillion in debt. Well, that's less than what we spent in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It would be much nicer to say, you know what? We didn't do Afghanistan, and that meant we had all this extra money to spend on
COVID. It's been a waste. And I'm sorry to my friends, family, people who are watching this right now, who served in the military, who went over to Afghanistan, who went over to Iraq, and fought, and just to, I can't tell you what you're feeling right now. And I know that there are some angry people out there, but this is the price of foreign interventionism, and doing what we did. Was the going after Osama bin Laden a worthwhile endeavor? I'll leave that to other people to decide. But the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were a complete waste of blood and treasure. And hopefully our leaders will learn that. But those who fail to learn from history are condemned to make American foreign policy. So
the interesting thing about it is that we had this moment at the end of Vietnam as well. It's almost exactly the same photo op of the
Huey
helicopter exactly flying off the top of the embassy.
Yep.
And we obviously learned nothing. We had these small, and I don't want to call them successes, but the Army would have called them successful interventions in terms of Grenada or Panama, these small little things. But when you put the Army in a country, aside from the fact that you put Americans in harm's way for, a tenuous purpose at best, the withdrawal is never going to be according to our terms, because we're leaving. Those weren't our terms. Our terms would have been that, somehow we had convinced people to not want to fight us anymore. As it turns out, you can't do that by bombing the crap out of them. The Americans dropped more bombs on North Vietnam than were dropped in all of World War II by every country. That did not make the North Vietnamese submit. We have a break in our thinking, because we think that it's better to spend money on military intervention and listen, I'm not, I don't want to advocate for spending money in foreign countries, but if we were to have taken that $7 trillion and built infrastructure and just given it to the Afghanis, that would have been a lot more effective than anything else that we did, because there is a wealth factor. Wealthy people don't go to war because they have too much to lose. So instead of trying to bomb them and make them poor, why don't we money bomb them and make them rich, and then they won't want to fight anymore, and we don't have to send any troops overseas to do that.
Yeah, or I mean, at the very least, I'm not, foreign aid is, as PJ O'Rourke says, is giving, taking money from poor people in the United States and giving it to rich people overseas.
Right.
But allowing companies to do business there, allowing free trade, free markets, that's something I'm down with. So, I mean, when you're talking about what was a more worthwhile use of that money, $7 trillion, helping people is far better than bombing the crap out of them. We'll bomb them back to the Stone Age. Well, that's like a 2-week loss for them at this point. It's like
Yikes.
you're
Yikes.
not
Well,
really doing anything that they're not completely experienced in at this point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got more comments coming. Let's see. We did have an announcement today that the Canadians are, Justin Trudeau announced a surprise snap election for September 20th to decide what to do with the COVID controversy in Canada. He feels that he's in an advantage at this point, but just as with Gavin Newsom in California, 6 weeks is a long time in politics. And whether you're feeling good now, in 6 weeks, or whatever September 20th is, it can change quite a bit. When they announced the results for the California recall election, the Gavin Newsom was in a good position at that point. Plurality of voters wanted to retain him, and now he's way underwater, and he's getting desperate and lashing out to a lot of people. It's kind of fun to watch. But yeah, Canada might have a same thing happen with them. So yes, I completely agree. Recall Newsom. And then somebody else asked us our stance on what's going on with COVID. Mandates suck. Mandates suck. Mandates suck. I am against mandates. I'm pro mandates.
You're pro mandating.
Mandating.
Government mandating.
Well, G-men can mandate if they want to. They used to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm against mandates. Forget mandates. Forget passports. All that good stuff.
So I have to tell a super geeky joke. Dave, are you familiar with basic Unix commands?
Oh no, I'm not that. I'm not
Okay.
that down.
Well, then just for the geeks out there, man is a command that you use to get the manual for how to do something in Unix, and there are two fundamental commands: date to get the date, and so you do man date. But then there's also mount to mount a drive. So a lot of times you would type man mount. So Unix was ahead of all the other OSs in being accepting of.
Very nice.
Must learn Unix.
The German word for team is manshaft.
Interesting.
Would you like to be on my manshaft? Sorry, we're letting a little bit of the After Dark bleed over to this episode.
That's okay.
Sorry to anybody's sensibilities who got offended with that one.
Well, so the last thing I want to say about Afghanistan is that the people who are unhappy about what's happening there are the ones who need to make the change, because we went through this, and after Vietnam, there was a serious change, and it lasted for a long time. There was a concerted effort that the U.S. wasn't going to get involved in overseas wars. And for a long time that lasted, and the government looked to find ways to get around that. And, finally they did. And, 9/11, everybody was up in arms. They wanted to do something. You can make an argument that because the training camps were in Afghanistan, maybe there's some justification to go in there and do something in the beginning. Nothing justifies 20 years of essentially occupation and making deals with the people who weren't popular, who couldn't win an election. And so, now we have this terrible situation where the 80,000 people who took American promises seriously, who pledged their lives to help our cause, are now being left behind.
Yep.
And left behind to, probably a terrible fate. And, that's a really terrible situation to be in. The best way to get there the best way to avoid it is to not, yes, that's very funny. Is to not be there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to go in, have an exit strategy. Okay. Our strategy should never be to occupy another country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the one thing I'll say is that, there are actually two successful examples of a better sort of, I don't want to say occupation, but if you look at what happened with Germany and Japan, all right, there was a little military occupation for a while, but we had such strong economic ties to them that we built them up. Germany and Japan became economic powerhouses because we built all these factories there, right? The Marshall Plan, all that stuff. And now they're strong capitalist countries. That's what we want. Maybe not as strong capitalists as we are, but they're strong capitalist countries.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's get back to the story at hand this evening. Let's talk about consent culture. Dan, you are I will say the libertarian expert on this. So I'll let you go first. What is consent culture?
Consent culture, I mean, the consent itself, I like to think that it is a core word for Americans because it's in the Declaration of Independence. It says the government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. That's an important phrase, the idea that we have to consent to be governed. Consent itself is an even stronger word. There's two fundamental ways that you can try to influence somebody. You can either try to persuade them or you can coerce them. And coercion involves using force, involves using leverage, trying to make somebody do something through threat of something bad happening, as opposed to persuasion where, I can be persuasive as hell, but you don't have to worry that you're going to suffer some detrimental consequences if I can't persuade you of something. Libertarians believe this fundamental idea that we own ourselves. You own yourself, I own myself. And because I own myself, nobody else gets to tell me what to do with my body. My body is my property. Nobody else gets to touch my property without my permission. Nobody gets to put something in me. Nobody gets to take something out of me. Nobody gets to sniff my hair. And I'm having a particularly heinous hair day today, I must add. All that stuff is critical. That's what consent is about, is that absent consent, nobody should have any interaction with you, period. You have to consent to almost every interaction. Now, obviously, in a public space, we might see each other. Okay, that's happened. We don't need consent to look at each other in a public space. But if I want to come up and touch you, even something as casual as shaking your hand, I never go up and grab somebody's hand and then start shaking it. I put my hand out and I let you have the chance to shake my hand so that you can consent to having a handshake. And one of the things that happens a lot of times is that you will see people come up and say, and just come in for the big hug right away. Okay. Not looking for consent or anything like that. That's a problem. That's the beginning of where we start. And, for me, it's easier for me to defer from somebody wanting to come up and hug because I can put my hand out, I can stop them, I can physically resist, and I have to deal with some social issues that, somebody might say, "Oh, what are you doing? That's a little weird." But I have the ability to stop being touched. And more than that, I also have a pretty good expectation that if I'm standing with a group of people, nobody's going to come up and put their hand on my back without my consent or put their hand on my bottom without my consent. All this stuff that happens to women all the time. And it doesn't matter who you are, right? Taylor Swift just had this enormous lawsuit where, this guy came up and put his hand on her ass without her consent. Had to go all the way to court to fight it, stuff like that. And for him, there's just this perception that it was okay to do it. It wasn't a big deal. He fought it all the way in court. He's like, what? I was just trying to be friendly, blah, 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 blah. A bunch of bullshit. Nobody gets to touch you without your permission. And now I'm going to stop because it's not really first and foremost a male issue. I'm going to let Emily, you have probably more wisdom around this than I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think there's any call for comparison of more or less wisdom. We each bring our own unique take to the every issue. But yeah, I mean, as speaking from a female's perspective, it's a daily struggle in public, and I mean literally daily. Even for a larger woman like myself, people frequently think it's acceptable to violate my personal space, to touch me, and it's almost always innocent. Don't get me wrong, but they don't ask for consent. They don't look for physical implied consent. That's something that we mentioned last week, that implied consent and implied non-consent are very real, and I do hope that we discuss that further later. But I think it's also important to note that there's a very pervasive, oh gosh, what do I want to say? It's very possible for our own belief of boundaries to be stripped away from us. So why do we think that it's okay for us to come in for that big hug? Well, we think it's okay for us to do that because we're comfortable with that. And society has generally accepted, oh, well, hugs are innocent, so that's okay. And so people who may not be comfortable with a hug will maybe accept the hug, even if they don't consent to it. The point being that, forgive me.
Well, no, I agree with you 100%. And I think that there's an interesting thing about that is that a lot of times there is coercion and people don't realize it. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're a manager, the consequence, you might think nothing about it. You want to show your employee that you think, oh, I think you're awesome and I'm going to touch you. And the problem, of course, is that for your employee, it's a much different thing. What they have to think about, what are the consequences if I say no, if I defend my bodily autonomy? Am I going to suffer from that? Is my boss going to think less of me because I didn't feel comfortable with a hug at the time?
I think where I'm leading toward is that it's actually, it goes beyond situational, transactional, one-on-one situations. When society, government, etc., strip people of their autonomy enough, it's very common for people to accept that they don't have the right to their autonomy.
That's such an outstanding point. In fact, that's the point of the evening, because there's so much stuff that happens at a governmental level, at an authoritarian level, that makes us say, oh, you know what? We don't have the right to not give consent. Or the idea of what we can consent to is weakened because the government has set the standard. And that's, we see that with Andrew Cuomo.
Masks.
Yeah, masks are a great example of that, right? Yeah. The idea that, the government gets to tell you what you're going to do, right? That undermines consent. And, the whole point of consent culture is that we're not saying consent for dating. We're not saying consent for, vaccinations. We're saying consent culture. It has to be a complete culture all along, that nobody gets to tell you what you're going to do. Nobody gets to dictate to you what you're going to have to feel comfortable with.
Right.
You find out, you decide for yourself what you feel comfortable with.
And that goes along with society making the decision to not add peer pressure to the mix, because that is coercion. There is a subtle threat of being distanced from our the people that we love, the people that we want to connect with. If we don't wear that mask, or if we don't get that vaccine, we're going to be shunned from, or banished even. Shakespeare wrote about the deep pains of banishment, because it's a human problem. We need that connection. We need to consent to being with the people that we love, and peer pressure is coercion.
Right. Yeah. And go ahead, Dave.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not just personal relationships or, even boss relationships that we're talking about here. I mean, consent culture can go, consent about how your money is spent by the government, consent about your money being taken by the government, consent about where you're allowed to go to, where, your freedom of movement as a human being
Yep.
is taken away from you by the government.
Mhm.
And people were like, oh no, I can go wherever I want to. All right, leave the country. Try and leave
Yep.
the country. If you don't have a passport, you don't get to leave the country.
But I'm not going to let the governed get a free pass here, because it is consent of the governed. A lot of people are cheering for those closed borders,
Yep.
et cetera. So a lot of people are all about taking away that autonomy from someone else.
Yep.
Right. And that's the fascinating point of it. Do we have, there's another conversation to be had about, a tyranny of the majority. Does democracy get to take away your consent? The 51% of people get to, there's a famous T-shirt meme, etc. Democracy has to be more than two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things that you can't vote on. Somebody's personal autonomy isn't subject to what you and your buddies think should happen to them. That has to be a higher level of respect. And the problem with that is that we have put so much faith in the idea that the majority gets to make decisions, that we use that to override the will of the minority. And that's a terrible thing, because we don't have any system in place other than, sort of our Bill of Rights, sort of the Constitution, that says there are some things that government can't do. There's some rights that are guaranteed to you. Because honestly, right, even the Constitution is not a definition of your rights. It just says that government can't interfere in certain aspects of them. But it's true, you don't actually have a right to speak. What you have is a right to not have government restrict your speech.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People always ask me, what about the Constitution? What about the Bill of Rights? And it's, when I think about the Bill of Rights, think about the founders and what they were going through at the time. It's not as they say, it's not an enumerated list of our rights that, these are only 10 rights and whatever we added on for the other 20 or 17 amendments. Those aren't our rights, all of our rights and only our rights. These are the ones that you have to look at when a government gets messed up and tyrannical. Those are the ones they tend to go after. And thinking about what the founders went through when, they're like, why do we need a third amendment? No soldiers are quartering in our homes. Well, you have a right to your home. So the third amendment applies to, police coming into your home. And
the British were doing that all the time.
Yeah.
The British were seizing colonists' homes and
Mhm.
putting troops up in there.
Yep. And forcing us to feed them and quarter them. Yeah. So, when you think about the Bill of Rights, those were the exacerbating circumstances that led to the war. So, but that's not all of our rights.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there's some glaring omissions in there.
Sure.
There is no right to privacy enumerated anywhere. You can argue that there's a right to unreasonable search and seizures, but that's not the same as a right to privacy. And it has to do with, the time at which it was written. Okay. Because, in 1789, if you want privacy, just head west. You don't have to worry about it at all. Right. But now your privacy is actually dependent on somebody else, because somebody could, if they wanted to, follow you around all the time when you're outside, live stream what's going on. Okay. That sort of thing.
Right here.
Yeah. And right. Exactly. And that's where we get into, again, this idea of consent, because there's a limit. Like one of the classic conversations is, does somebody have to have your consent to videotape you? And I would argue you don't have an expectation of privacy in public, but I don't think that somebody else could say that they have the right to, videotape you all the time and put pictures of you online. In fact, we can argue that that's something that happens all the time to some people, that pictures are taken of them and they get shared. And, in this terrible lack of consent culture that we have, we fundamentally have no respect for individual dignity and individual privacy, because we don't think that we need consent for some things. We think that we have rights. In fact, this is a new line of thinking for me, but in many ways, what we're talking about is this incredible perversion of what your rights actually are. A lot of people think that, yeah, Eric's got it. People think that there is this ability. Your right means that you get to take pictures of other people because they're in public. And so you get to take pictures of them. You get to do whatever you want to with them because those are your properties. And that's where the law itself is insufficient to the idea of consent culture.
And I don't think it ever could be sufficient.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. Well, it's tough, but we could certainly do a good job of not undermining it at the top level.
Absolutely. I think it's a societal issue, which is, of course, going to evolve as populations boom. Americans have more privacy than, say, Europeans, because we're not all on top of each other. We have the benefit of space, so privacy is still a newer thing, whereas people over in Europe, they're already used to not having their privacy anymore.
Right. And as a result, we're fighting all those other conventions where people have been expected to relinquish a lot of their rights for the community.
Right.
But of course, and that's sort of where the whole masking thing comes in, is a lot of people, we see some of the comments going on right now. People are saying, oh, well, if you want to wear a mask, you're free to wear a mask and be afraid, blah, 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 blah. I wear a mask out in places where people ask me to wear masks, and I'm happy to do so because of my fundamental belief of respecting other people. But there are places where people don't want me to wear a mask or don't ask me to wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask in those places.
Ooh, I agree. Like, respecting other people's wishes is one thing, but I think we've already taken this way too far. A mask is not going to be more effective. I need to be careful with what I say. If someone is wearing a mask, yes, they are protecting themselves. Me not wearing a mask is not going to increase their risk.
Well,
I'm not really respecting them. I'm damaging my boundaries.
I will disagree with that. I don't think that wearing a mask protects you at all, with the exception of the N95s. Wearing a mask doesn't protect you at all. But the basic thing about it is, if you're infected and you spit on somebody, you've got a pretty good chance of transferring the virus to them. Now,
that's a different topic, though. That's not what we were talking about.
You're talking about whether or not wearing a mask protects somebody else, whether you wearing a mask protects you from infecting somebody else.
Yeah, but you added that extra layer of this person being sick that we weren't talking about.
Well, the problem is you don't know if you're sick or not. I mean, okay. But
if the mask isn't useful in the first place, what's the point?
No, but you would agree that if you're wearing a mask and you sneeze, you're not going to spray other people.
Right, but you can also, tuck your face into your arm.
Sure, you can. But sometimes people don't do that. Sometimes you cough and you don't realize it. Stuff like that.
But we're conflating the issue here, because that's the thing, though. With societal problems, there really is no one size fits all answer, and it's very easy to get lost in the weeds.
Yep. I agree with that. The fundamental question is, one of consent. And so I don't think that anybody should be forced to wear a mask in their home or in a public space. However, I think that, it's easy to prove that there are at least some cases where a mask makes you less likely to spread an infection.
Yeah. I mean, if a private business wants you to do it, I can't argue against that. That's their decision. I mean, just like with DeSantis in Florida. I mean, I get for not wanting to have mask mandates. That's I'm down with that. But then mandating private companies not,
Yeah.
it also takes away their agency.
Right. It's I mean, mandating, right. What DeSantis is doing is exactly the same as Obamacare. Okay, it's exactly the same thing, saying,
Sure.
oh, if you're a company, you have to provide health insurance for your employees. You're a company, you can't have a mask policy. If it's your company, if it's your business, you get to decide what's going to happen in it, period. And the marketplace, if we have a truly free market, the market will let you know. And you know what? There's room for both places. We have Massachusetts banned smoking, all indoor smoking, except in your own private house years ago. There is as a result, though, that meant that a market opened up for very special bars to get licenses that people could smoke in them. Now, there's cigar bars. That's specifically what their business is. But people who want to smoke go to those cigar bars and hang out in them. And that's where they can smoke cigarettes and drink at the same time. Now, me personally, I will tell you, the kids don't even understand this anymore. But it used to be that when you would go to a bar and everybody was smoking there all the time, your hair would smell of cigarettes when you got home and your clothes and stuff like that. I would happily, now that I'm not a smoker and I quit smoking April 27th, 2001, I would very happily choose to go to a non-smoking bar over a bar that had smoking. And in fact, that happened when we were in South Dakota. There was a bar I went to for the first time, and they had smoking in it. I was pretty shocked. And I'm like, yeah, I'm never coming back here. And I didn't go back the rest of the week I was there. People can vote for their dollars. And that's the same thing that what should happen with, restaurants that want to have masks. I mean, considering nobody wears a mask when they're eating anyway, it's kind of a silly thing. However, let's talk about other basic hygiene things. If a restaurant says, you know what, we don't require our employees to wash their hands, that's good. I would like for them to publicize that if that's their policy. Exactly. You used to have cigarette vending machines in bars. People get to choose the one that they want to go to, and that's it. And so if there's maskless restaurants, people should go there if that's what they support. If you don't care whether or not your server's wearing a mask, go. I can tell you, I went to several restaurants in South Dakota that nobody was wearing a mask. I didn't care.
Yeah.
What I was trying to get at was how making the blanket statement of, if someone asks me to wear a mask, I will put one on out of respect for them. I think that statement undermines the consent, because or the general. I'm terrible at speaking today. I've been tripping over my words all day, but because you have every right to protect yourself and to do whatever you want with your body, and it's not disrespectful to someone else for you to do whatever the F you want with your body, as long as it isn't harming them or, in any way infringing upon their life, property, or, health. So, I just want to be very careful about saying it's respectful to put on a mask if someone asks you to, because I think it's disrespectful for someone to ask you to put on a mask.
I think it depends on where you are.
Sure.
If, so we had, I do compare this a lot to smoking. So Libertarian Party of Massachusetts is very involved in fighting when they banned smoking in public parks, because I think in a public park, you ought to be able to do whatever you want. People go to a public park. You can no more expect to not smell cigarette smoke occasionally than you can to not hear kids screaming in the park. Sure. There are times that I certainly say to myself, well, I'd like to go someplace where I don't hear kids crying right now. But, I can't really ask parents to not have their kids cry. On the other hand, if I'm on a big giant beach and there's nobody else there, and a family with a couple of kids comes and sits down right next to me, I'd say, hey, guys, the whole beach. Your kids would probably be a lot happier than watching me shoot heroin, which I'm going to do in the next 5 years. Something like that.
Start pulling rubber band out.
That took a turn I wasn't expecting.
Exactly. Maybe your kid can help you find a vein.
Jesus Christ.
Hey, kid, you got some steady hands? Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's the thing. Stephanie makes a good point. I could get up and move, but
that's societal niceness here.
Exactly.
I mean,
well,
we have to have some.
Yeah, it is a critical thing, and that we all have to realize that we all exist. We live at the sufferance of each other, and we can point to a lot of cases where one crazy person can do a tremendous amount of damage in horrific ways. Having a society that's a little more tolerant of people and their individual liberties, I don't have any proof. I can't back it up, but I've got to believe that's going to help that by not having as many frustrated people in the world that have to lash out. There is, a point of which I choose to be a member of society. Okay, that's my choice, but I do it because there are benefits. In many ways, it's almost a contractual thing. By being a member of society, I get a lot of cool stuff out of it. I get to hang out with people. I get professional sports leagues, all these things that are really meaningful to me. And do I have to compromise some things along the way in order to have that society? I do. I don't get to be the king. I don't get to tell everybody what they want to do. I have to treat others with respect. That's a compromise, a choice that I choose to make. If you don't want to make that, you can still go to rural Alaska, live on your own, find a place where you don't have to deal with a lot of that crap.
Well, and I think that statement it gave me it triggered my, well, you should just move to Somalia, so yes, respect goes both ways, and that's why I was so adamant about saying something about, yes, if I were on a bus and someone asked me to put a mask on and we had nowhere else to go, sure, I'll put on a mask, like, just if I don't have to breathe you in either, fine. But because of the current societal situation of perpetual fear, people are going to try more and more to control their environment in the exact way that they want to control it, which strips people of their liberties, which is why I said, hey, it isn't always respectful to ask someone to wear a mask.
Right. Well, I definitely agree with that. If you see somebody who is, let's take a terrible situation. Somebody's grieving over something and they're sitting there and they're crying and they're with their family and stuff like that. You're going to go up to them and say, oh, I really wish you'd wear a mask while you're doing that. It's terrible.
Yeah.
The fundamental thing that we're talking about is respect. And that respect comes back to consent culture. Because if we all have at our core the idea that we will never interfere with somebody without consent, that teaches us respect for their autonomy. And that's the critical thing about it. And because it's, as we talked about, it's very difficult to do in a law. But if we have a culture, a culture that says I should get affirmative consent, informed affirmative consent from somebody else before I impact their lives, that gives us that level of respect that would guide us much better through the other things, as opposed to, you see this epidemic of Karens going on right now. Okay. That's all happening because of a disregard for consent culture. Karens think that, they can just make whatever rules they want and you have to follow them, as opposed to the fact that if you're impacting their lives, you need consent. And it's been going on for a long time. I'm way back in the day, I was a skateboarder. I used to get chased by adults all the time, skateboarding in parking lots. Hey, how crazy is that? Right? All the stuff that we could be teaching ourselves in terms of respect through consent, we undermine through the institutions of government and the hierarchy of authority that we set up in our society all the time.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's good. We fixed that.
All right.
All right. Problem solved. Night, guys.
I mean, we're all in politics. Well, involved in the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
Is it just an endemic issue with the Libertarian, or not the Libertarian Party, but politics in general, that brings in people that don't respect consent, that want to control? That the old adage of power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. What can we do, to turn the political culture around? Because I think that's probably one of the worst parts of it, is that our political culture right now is just so permeated with people who believe they can violate your consent, whether it's a guy like Cuomo grabbing women without their consent, or mask mandates and passports,
or Donald Trump building a wall, seizing people's land to build a wall.
Exactly.
The problem is that it happens with the best of intentions, right? All the time. Like, you think about Social Security, right? So for me, I love the end of Social Security, the end goal of Social Security, which is that old people don't starve. That's a really good idea. Now, the method of how they do it is that they're taking money from people, from all of us, along the way to put into this lockbox, which unfortunately isn't a lockbox, and they spend it into everything that's broken about it. But I think most of us would agree that the end goal of Social Security, of having this safety net so that elderly people aren't eating cat food to get by, that's a very worthwhile goal.
Hey, my cat's food looks delicious.
We actually buy a cat food that's called Grandma's Dinner.
No.
Insane. Oh, I'm gonna have to find a picture of it and put it on the screen now.
That's so wrong.
It is. It's so wrong. Hang on a second.
Wow. Okay. But it's the Friedman maxim that the do-gooders want you to judge their programs based on their intent rather than what they deliver. Right. We intend not to have grandma and grandpa starve. What have you delivered? Way below poverty wages, and no hope that it's ever going to be around when we get to the point that we qualify for Social Security. Especially in a country that's now $29 trillion in debt.
Right.
Kim was such a better speaker than I am, and I'm sure that she would say something so much more eloquently than I'm about to, but we have to educate from the societal position that we're in order to change upward, because they only operate with our consent. So the louder people like us talk, the more we have these conversations with everyday people, not just in our echo chambers. That's how we make the change. We have to continue to say, let's not do this. Let's do this instead.
Right.
We have to provide what to do instead. And that's even just like for, parents with their children. It's so much more effective to change behavior by saying, don't do this instead. It scales all the way up.
Yeah.
And as far as politics being permeated by people hungry for power, this isn't new. That is politics. In one way or another, we're here to say my voice is important and it needs to be listened to. And we can decide how, to what extent people listen to us and how we coerce them to listen to us. And that's where libertarians differ from the rest, is that we aren't going to really force you to listen to us. Yeah, Social Security is a scam. I'm going to stop talking.
Well,
all right, let me show this then.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So
there it is in the store. Grandma's dinner cat food. And I mean, I appreciate the idea that it's supposed to be that it's grandma's dinner and you get the leftovers and the cat gets them. But yeah, too many horrific stories behind that.
Awful. But it makes me laugh. So
yeah. But so, you make a great point that one of the things that I've always talked about when I've run as a libertarian is that the end game of libertarianism is the end of politics as we know it. Libertarians want a political system in which government has so little power that nobody's going to be competing for the ability to get it. Right now, Republicans and Democrats run for office so that they can pay off the people who got them there. It's all about what can I do for the people who gave me millions of dollars so that I was able to get elected. Libertarians want a system in which the government can't award $1 million contracts, that it doesn't have that power to do it, that it can't violate somebody's consent. And there is this unholy trinity, this unholy circle where all power derives from the people. Okay, that's the fundamental truth, right? Power to the people. But then the idea is that we created a government and we said, okay, we're going to give it some limited powers so that it can do some things that we're not able to do individually for whatever reason. That was the model that we saw for government. Okay. But the problem is, though, that then government said, okay, well, we've taken some power from the people. And now what we can do is we can give some of that power to corporations. And so now corporations have all this benefit. Sorry, Stephanie, but it was too funny not to share. But now corporations have this power. So I have this thing I used to run on, I call Fishman's Law. In the beginning, the government created corporations so that a business person could take a risk and not lose their house. In the beginning, government created corporations for the benefit of business. The problem is now that we have corporations creating government for the benefit of business. Government.
How many times do we have to watch Facebook's ads about getting more government regulation?
Right, exactly. It's one of those crazy things that government and corporations are now supporting each other in saying, there's only so much power in the universe. Power is a closed system. And if all power derives from the people, the only way corporations can get more power, the only way government can get more power is to take it from the people. So libertarianism is in fact the idea of returning all the power to the people. So that means depower government, empower people. It's very simple. And if you depower government, you're taking power away from the corporations too, because all the power the corporations have is given to them by the government.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And fueled by the people. Let's not forget, we consumers.
Well, and the problem is that there's so many people who want government to have to take care of them. There's so many people who don't want to have to worry about this, that, or the other thing. Oh, I just want to be taken care of. Government, please guarantee me health care and food and all this other stuff. And the reality of it is that that's not the purpose of government. If you want some institution to do that, there are plenty of private institutions that will do that for you now.
And that's a societal problem. Much like with consent culture, we need to loudly address.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's the whole circle that comes back to it, is that there are all these things that, like a great example of corporations using the government to violate consent culture. Okay, how come I can't buy medicine in Canada and bring it back into the United States? How is that possibly illegal? That's because corporations, American pharmaceutical companies, have cut a deal with the government to deprive me of my actual rights. It's insane. And we talked about this the other day. on an earlier show, I used to always say, you know what? We don't have a right to healthcare because healthcare is provided by a healthcare provider. And so when anybody says, oh, you have a right to healthcare, they're wrong. We fought a war about that in this country. You don't have a right to somebody else's labor. However, Dan Berman, presidential candidate in 2020, convinced me, actually, no, you have a right to seek the healthcare that you want. Nobody has to provide it for you. Nobody is obligated to provide you with healthcare. But if you think that the healthcare that's going to make you better is cannabis, you have a right to seek that. If you think the healthcare that's going to make you better is ayahuasca, you have a right to seek that. Whatever it is that you think is the thing that you need to make you better, you have a right to choose all of those things. Government shouldn't get in the way.
Yep.
And again, that's about consent. I get to put into my body whatever I want. Nobody gets to stop me from putting things into my body. What about people like me who advocate for government on the basis of stopping residents creating negative externalities?
I think I would need an example of a negative.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because, if your argument for negative, could be. I mean, I don't know if we're going down the social libertarianism argument that rent is theft, which I disagree with. I know that there are, cores of libertarians who do think that, but fundamentally for me, I think that, if I own property, I get to do with what I want. And if that means there's an externality that you don't like because of the fact that I own property, I can't help you with that. I didn't actively go out and do something that made your life worse by existing. Because
there we go.
Oh, well, then that's a great example. I think that the people get to do that.
The people, always the people. I mean, every time we give government power, they will corrupt it. They will take it and run with it.
I'll give you an example. It happened a few years ago in New Mexico. I believe it was the Animas River. But anyway, they the federal government emptied out a mine or did something, and the mine dumped just tons of just awful stuff into the river, and it turned it just like bright orange. And the company that did that was still in operation, had moved on years before, and we're prevented from suing that company because they cut a deal with the federal government.
Everybody remembers British Petroleum.
Yeah,
BP dumped 8 gazillions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, and the federal government come in and said, you know what, we're declaring a tax, a cap, $40 billion. That's the maximum that they're liable for, no matter what. In fact, the EPA is just a place where companies go to buy permission from the government to pollute the environment. And any place where you look at that, there are things about that, like, we talked about restaurants earlier and not having to wash your hands. Well, there's a Board of Health that comes in and it says there's a certain percentage of rat droppings that's acceptable in your food. You know what? I don't buy that. I don't like the fact that you can buy a certain amount of rat droppings to be served in the food. It's not unreasonable, but government gives businesses a license to violate stuff like that. The best solution, the thing that handles it the most, is that if you are harmed, you get to sue to be made whole. And that is, we say all the time, no victim, no crime. If you're a victim, so if somebody pollutes a local river, okay, that river doesn't belong to them. It actually belongs to everybody. So everybody who's impacted gets to sue the company that does that. And if we allowed that to happen, then, if these companies weren't protected, then first of all, they would probably get insurance against these massive lawsuits. And then the insurance companies would come in and say, hey, look, we don't want you to lose a lawsuit. So we're implementing all these standards you have to have to get insured. And then we might even say, you know what? We're going to have a very simple law that you need to be insured against the damage that you can possibly do in a place before you can open up a business. Then it's almost entirely regulated by the market. I'm not a huge fan of saying you have to require insurance, but if we, full disclosure, I'm a minarchist. If we have to have some level of intervention, I don't think that's the worst one.
I mean, that's been my advocacy on policing reform is that instead of having qualified immunity, that they need to be bonded and insured to practice law. Like that's how you deal with qualified immunity rather than making everyone pay for their mistakes.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a great point. Somebody says rat feces is impossible to keep out of grain. I mean, at the warehouse, yes, but in the restaurant, no. I think that in the restaurant you can make sure that, or at least you can keep things clean. Let the people choose what they want.
Yeah.
Don't let the government give people a license to do it. And if you say that there's some of these things have to happen, let the people make informed decision. Don't let the government give people a license to do that.
Yeah.
So, I think Monty Python said it best, Now this chocolate, crunchy frog. Am I to understand that it contains a real crunchy frog? Yes, of course it does. That's what we're talking about. Just put that in there. We put in there warning packed in a plant that may contain peanuts. Why not packed in a plant? We do the best we can to keep things clean. However, there's a possibility that there might be, some rat droppings in there, or a fingernail, or whatever.
Dave fell in the vat.
Right. It's one of those things.
Fat for you guys. Woo-hoo.
They're making whipped cream. And there's Dave in the vat. Throw in some strawberries.
Or it could be like, what are the Canadian hoser guys? Bob and Doug McKenzie.
Yep.
Strange brew. Like,
hoser, eh?
Drink it all, man.
Yep.
But let's see. What else do we got?
I mean, just to tie it around to the last thing. Consent culture again. We can do a lot about this. Okay. Don't support people who are being dicks, even if they're on your side politically.
Yeah.
Okay. If somebody's, I do a pretty, Libertarian Party's doing a pretty good job right now of calling out some people who might claim that they're libertarians, but in fact are, small-minded bigots. That's an important thing to do.
Yeah.
People who violate consent have to be called out all the time. And Republicans got to do the same thing. Okay. Too many Republicans are like, oh, Trump's talk about grabbing somebody. That's just locker room talk. We're going to say it's okay. Democrats did the same thing. Oh, you know what? Joe Biden, he sniffs hair because he's a connoisseur of shampoo and he just wants to see what people are wearing. It's not okay. Everybody has to call out people who are violating consent culture, and don't just do it, public figures. The next time you're in a meeting or you're in a bar, when you see somebody touch somebody without their consent, it's okay to say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
You can ask. And we can start by modeling that ourselves. If a stranger comes up and touches you, and I tell you what, if a lot more men did this, to call out my gender here, if a lot more men said, hey, I wish you would ask before you touch me, that would be a great example in society, because it would say, look, this is not an unreasonable thing to ask for, because I think that men are mostly the violators in this case.
And what I will say is I'm loath to point at any one gender, because we all have a responsibility to protect ourselves. But there's something that I think a lot of men don't understand about women and the generational trauma that has been passed to us through time eternal. Men are stronger than women physically. There's just no argument. And the mere presence of a man can be a threat to a woman. And so that becomes very tricky and very individual. So it's hard for me to define, because I'm certainly not saying that every man is a threat. But what I am saying is that some women do find every man to be a threat. And I am saying that almost every man could overpower almost any woman if they wanted to. And we know that in our bones. So I think unfortunately, the responsibility does fall on men a little bit to be aware of their strength.
Yeah.
Because under threat of coercion or force, there is, the fight, flight, or freeze response. And a lot of women freeze, including myself, where if we feel that there's a threat, the best thing to do is just stay still, just like a deer.
Look at that young lady in the picture with Andrew Cuomo. Like,
Right.
he's holding her by the arms, and
What is she supposed to do? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
she is a deer in headlights, and it should have been clear to this dude, but he's been told yes by everyone for his entire life, and
Right. Or nobody's right. Very few people have said no to him.
yeah,
That's the problem. If people had said yes, that would have been at least, something, but nobody said. So few people were willing to say no because of the consequences they thought it might have. I used to, when I went back to school to get my CS degree, I would come home on the last train on the Green Line. I'd get off at a stop called Leechmere, which at 1:00 in the morning was a pretty terrible stop. And there was a woman who always, for a long time, rode the same train as me, and we would get off at the same time, and then we would have to wait for a bus. And I could tell that, like, I made her nervous. At the time, I looked even worse than I do now. I had a long hair and a goatee, and it was just ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. And so I mentioned it to somebody, and I said, I feel bad because I can tell that I'm scaring this woman. I don't really want to. And, a woman said to me, she's like, you know what? Why don't you introduce yourself on the train and tell her, you stand where you want, and you tell me where you would like me to stand, and I'll wait over there. And, whatever it takes for you to be comfortable. I want to do that. And as it turns out, that led to a better conversation. And after a week of that, because she said, I'd like to stand where you're standing inside this shelter that's out of the wind. And I'm like, you do that. I don't get cold anyway. And then I'll go, 10 feet down the street. And then afterwards, she's like, why don't you come in here? And then Johnny, now we're friends. We've been friends for like 20 years. But it was, sort of being aware of the fact that that you can potentially, it depends on who you are. That's about your own level of personal responsibility, what you want to do. And I'm not even saying that I think that's required behavior by anybody. It's just, do you want to be kind?
It's one of the social niceties.
Exactly. There's this great thing going around. You can be anything you want to be in this world. So why not be kind?
Absolutely. So did we get everything we wanted to talk to? We talked about informed consent.
I don't think we talked about informed consent.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we can talk about that if you want.
Let's talk about lying, and even lies done in the name of kindness. I don't think that this information would do this person any good. It might make them mad, but for no reason. So why would I tell them? This is something that I'm guilty of, that sorry. I learned this hard lesson a couple years ago where I withheld some information from a very dear friend, and it was because I didn't think it would do any good for them to know it, and it wouldn't do any good for them to not know it. It was just, something that they didn't need to know, but apparently they felt that they needed to know it. And so when they found out, they explained to me how I was denying them the autonomy of informed consent because I was withholding information for them to make up their own mind. And that's something I would love for both of your input on, just to discuss more just that topic. Yeah, sorry.
So I'm going to guess that this has to do with, you knew that somebody was a douchebag and you didn't tell your friend that they were a douchebag. Is that it?
Sure.
Okay.
No, but let's go with that.
But I mean, it is an interesting thing because, so one of my favorite things to do, I am, to set the audience off, I'm genetically predisposed to be a yenta. So I like to set people up. I say, oh, I've got this friend. I think you guys would make great partners, stuff like that. But there's a lot of times where people will ask me, so what do you think about me and this person? I'll be like, I don't know. Maybe you should get to know them better. That sort of thing. And there are, is a lie of omission always a lie? Does that impair informed consent? It's an interesting thing. For example, I have a friend who is a very good friend of mine. I have never seen him be violent ever. However, one ex-girlfriend said that there was a point in time at which he shoved her. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Knowing my friend, I don't believe that ever happened. But I don't want to disregard or, and I also know how sometimes in couples, things can be misconstrued at times. So I don't know what the truth is. So when people ask me, oh, what about, dating your friend? Let's just hypothetically call him Zeke. What about Zeke? Do I have an obligation to say, well, I've known like 10 women that he's gone out with, and he's definitely, I do actually say, he's definitely a player, gets around, stuff like that. Do I have an obligation to say, and there's this one person who once said that he shoved her? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Well, actually, that's not true. I do. I don't have any indication that story is particularly true. And so I usually don't bring it up. And I don't think of that as a lie of omission. I think.
At what point is that your business too?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one friend talking about dating another friend. And for me, right, I love double dates. So like if I can get two people that I like hooked up together and then we can all go out and date together, that's awesome. I love that. But I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that. But I do have all sorts of questions about what is, how do you help somebody have informed consent if you have information that's maybe a story that's not yours to tell? That's the other thing about it.
Well, I would say just simply say, hey, I know something that isn't my story to tell. I would invite you to ask this person about it yourself. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So, right. Exactly. Like, I have a couple of friends who, they have, what's a polite way to put it? They have children. And, when people ask me, should I tell them up front, say, well, he's got a kid, this is, I've talked about this before on the thing. My friend, John, his, when his sister died, he adopted her kids, and, he takes care of them now, stuff like that at home. And he was a bad dater before that. Afterwards, I mean, it was just terrible. And so now, it's an interesting thing about it. Although there are all sorts of, great things about him, great character, stuff like that. I always wondered, should I volunteer that information right away? Because I will occasionally have friends say, hey, your friend John seems like a really good guy. I'm like, he is a really great guy. I just want to let you know he has 2 kids living at home. Should I say that right away, or is that his story to tell? I don't know.
It's his.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it comes up in the conversation. Like, does he have any kids? Right. You can dash it out there, but I wouldn't lead with that or anything like that.
But of course, you could always ask him too. Like, hey, since I know you're single and ready to mingle, like, what information, if someone approaches me, what information are you comfortable with me putting out there?
That's part of the problem, is that he's so bad at dating. He's not really ready to mingle, Like he would need help to get ready to get to that level. So I don't want to hurt his chances along the way. But yeah, I guess I guess. I mean, fortunately, I don't live in Massachusetts anymore, so I don't have to worry about that issue. But it's funny because he, a widower is the man.
Mm-hmm.
So a widower with children is, he has such a weird life anyway. Like he has 2 daughters now living with him and he has no female relatives, very few friends. His mother's dead. And so trying to guide these young women through, oh my God, it's a nightmare. And like, he takes it so personally because a lot of times, like, the girls will come home and they're like, oh, I'm getting teased because of, my clothes or anything like that. And he's like trying to be right, do the best he can as a dad, but it's very, very tough. Anyway, we're way off topic here. Informed consent. Let's get back to informed consent. So let's talk about the easy violation of informed consent. Things that people say in bars without violating informed consent. I have occasionally told people that I am Mark Zuckerberg, the inventor of Facebook. I'm just kidding. I don't say that. But that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, definitely. I mean, if there's ever a petri dish of violations of informed consent, it is a bar.
Exactly.
Bar or Las Vegas.
Yep.
My dog is desperately trying to get my attention. I'm sorry.
Does he want to be on camera?
He wants me to throw his tennis ball, but he won't bring it to me. So
I think you should just, yeah, exactly. Have him bring it and then juggle it on the camera. We'll like it.
Yes.
All right. What else are informed consent violations?
I mean, I get what you're saying with the original part was, it's really tricky when it comes to personal relationships.
Right.
Like I don't know. I'm not one to, because, maybe something happened in the past that might predict the future, but perhaps the person has had, an epiphany and has changed their behaviors or whatever. I can't, I mean.
Well, and that's where you must take a step back from things that aren't your story to tell. If it involves another person, you just have to say, listen, I can't tell you everything because they aren't my words to say. Mm-hmm. Throw the ball back in the inquiring person's court. Give them enough information to say to that one person, hey, I was told I need to ask you a question about this.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty simple to solve.
Yep. I agree with that.
All right. So Dan, tell people about People for Liberty.
So we represent a broad place for people to land in the liberty movement. No matter where you are, and I know we get a lot of people who watch these shows who, become interested in the liberty movement. Chances are pretty good there's going to be somebody in the liberty movement that you disagree with. In fact, I can guarantee it. 100% guarantee there's somebody in the liberty movement that you disagree with. Yeah. The thing is, a lot of times that pushes people away from the liberty movement, and it shouldn't. No. The name of our organization is very specific. We are the People for Liberty. We have a whole bunch of different groups. We focus on a wide variety of issues, and we want people to find the place that they feel comfortable in talking about liberty issues, and what they're doing. You might not be in favor of legalizing heroin. You might not be in favor of completely open borders. You might not be in favor of, you might be in favor of some limited government. All those things, there are places for you within People for Liberty. And we try to do organizations that and opportunities that bring us together. So as an example, on May 1st, we declared the National Libertarian Day of Service. We asked people to get out and do something for the general public voluntarily. People went out and cleaned park trails. People brought in donations to food banks, all while wearing Liberty clothing. And that's what we want to show, is that the Liberty movement is actually a lot broader than just legalizing cannabis or, just talking about marriage equality. The Liberty movement encompasses all of these issues. And so if you've got one issue that is liberty focused, there's a home for you somewhere in People for Liberty. And please, people, check us out, peopleforliberty.org. We've got a big event coming up. I'm going to give you a preview of it because I'm actually, after this phone call, working on the website. But we're going to be sending care packages to Cuba. Right now, the Cubans are having a really terrible time of it, trying to fight for freedom. Martha Bueno, who people might know, is running for county commissioner in Dade County. It's a very personal story. She is Cuban by descent. Her mother had to break her father out of a political prison in Cuba. Now, that's her story to tell, but it's an amazing one. And so we're going to do what we can to organize people across the country to send things to Cuba, and we'll have all the details about what you can send to Cuba, how you can do it. You can only do boxes certain size, stuff like that. But that's what we want to do, is every month we have some sort of effort that we can all get involved in. That doesn't matter where you are on the liberty fence. Find a way to get together and rub shoulders and work with other liberty people. And you don't have to be libertarians. We have a Democrats for Liberty. We have a Republicans for Liberty. Finding a way for a libertarian and a Democrat and a Republican to get together and say, we agree that this freedom is essential, that makes the world a better place. And so that's what People for Liberty is all about.
It allows you to get in discussions with those people and explain to them why the other freedoms are essential.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what we were getting at the whole night.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing about it is that's when you talk with other libertarians, okay, or other liberty people, you're not really teaching yourself anything good about how to communicate the message.
Yes.
But if you talk to a Republican, like I always say all the time, I have a couple friends who are Marxists, and I'm much happier having a political conversation with them because they actually know what they believe. Democrats and Republicans have no idea what the hell their political philosophy actually is because it's changed so many times on them. Marxists have this very clear thing. And the thing is, to a certain extent, right? Marxists, there's all of us, I believe in a certain limited level of Marxism, right? The core idea of Marxism is from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. And that's how your family probably ran. When you were a kid, your parents, who had the ability to take care of you, did take care of you from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. They provide you the thing to go out there. And then if you're very lucky, you will get a situation where you get to return that favor and you have the ability to take care of your parents from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. Now, do I think that works anything larger than a family scale? No, absolutely not. Would I form a government on it? That's completely crazy. But the fundamental idea of taking care of people from each according to abilities. And so, I like to talk to some Marxists about some basic ideas about that, about how they believe taking care of each other. I don't agree with using force.
Yeah. There you go. Emily, what you got going?
I'm currently volunteering as an event coordinator for a local animal charity. So
Awesome.
Alongside work, that's my little bit of voluntarism.
How crazy are things there? I know that like during the pandemic, people have been adopting pets like crazy. Is it still like that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm on such the back end of things
Gotcha.
that I honestly don't know.
This is right up your alley, though, because you are.
Oh yeah.
I love all your pictures of animals that you post all the time. They're wonderful. Warm fuzzy feelings.
Yeah.
All right.
Like
Anything else
creatures
for the night?
I think it's good. I appreciate all the guests being here. I think
Yeah.
this was a good conversation. Watching the conversations in the
absolutely.
in the chat is really good. Guys, keep it up. Keep talking about consent culture. In fact, I'm going to push into the hashtag hashtag consent culture. And if everybody could post that to their wall, that would be awesome. I'd love to see it trending.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Hashtag consent culture.
Put it in Facebook, put it in Twitter, put it,
Yep.
Wherever
put it in a chat so that it goes into all the threads, Dave.
Yeah, let me do that.
Yay. Because consent culture, it's an easy thing for us to talk about. And it means something to everybody. Everybody, the one unifying experience, everybody's got a situation where the government has violated their consent and they think it's wrong. So let's start talking about that as that unifying thing, that we all agree with the idea that consent has to be culture. It can't be law. It can't be anything else. There it is. Share it up, guys. Share up consent culture. Sorry, people. I'm trying to stop using guys. Share it up, people.
Yeah, no, I'm still using guys, and I hate it.
Yeah.
Y'all.
Yep. Y'all. Peeps.
Y'all.
Folk. All right.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Just a couple of reminders. 2 weeks, you can come meet Dan Fishman and I in Denver, Colorado. We're going to have the 50th anniversary.
Dudes.
That's going to be fun. Yeah, 50.lp.org. If you have not registered, there's still time to get on out to Denver, hang out with me and Dan. We'll have a great time. And then for our go here for the regional and affiliate campaign training initiative, that is this week they're in Long Beach, so there is no drama in the LBC. They're doing. They've wrapped up their training for the weekend, but there's still, I believe, 5 other locations that they're still doing for regional training. So get on out there. It's like Shreveport, Indianapolis, Atlantic City,
New York. Oh, Atlantic City, right?
And Des Moines. So
Are you going to AC, Dave?
I'm thinking about it. I really am.
I'm definitely going. I'm going to be
My credit card needs to stop smoking.
I hear that.
But yeah, I really do want to do the campaign side this time.
And because if you come to the Atlantic City one, I'm going to give you one of these, the Blackjack Basic Strategy cards, branded with the Libertarian Party logo and some basic stuff on the back. So think about coming to Atlantic City, everybody who can.
All right. Yeah, if you can get to Atlantic City, that's going to be a good time. So and training is absolutely wonderful.
And Bruce Springsteen's going to be doing one of the trainings at the Atlantic City Convention. So anybody wants to do that.
That's an informed consent thing.
Oh, I'm violating informed consent there. I think you're right. That's a good closer.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this week. We really appreciate it. Thanks to Dan and Emily. There is no After Dark program tonight since we ran over, and nobody wants to see our faces anymore, except for Emily's. We can be her the next hour and a half.
That's nice. Oh my God. No. Y'all have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Take care. Thank you for joining us on the Political Deep Dive. We air every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can get regular updates on our show and our guests by following us on social media on Facebook.com/thepoliticaldeepdive, all one word, on Twitter.com/politicaldeep, all one word, on YouTube.com/Papaduke, PAPADUKE, on Twitch.tv, The Political Deep Dive, all one word, and on Mondays, the audio of this episode is uploaded to SoundCloud.com/The Political Deep Dive, all one word. And you can join in on the fun on Instagram.com/The Political Deep Dive, all one word. The best way to support the Liberty Movement is to join the Libertarian Party at lp.org. Give us a like, a share, and a subscribe on whatever platform you're watching from. It helps extend our reach, and we greatly appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern.